Years later, during a prestigious global leadership conference, Ethan was invited to give the closing speech, a speech that would be broadcast across countless nations, watched by millions. Standing behind the podium, dressed not in a custom-made suit, but in his simple, familiar style, he looked out over the sea of faces before him and smiled. He began not with his achievements, not with charts or strategies, but with a story about a forgotten badge, a determined young guard, and a leader who chose patience over pride. He spoke about the power of small moments, about how the choices we make when no one is watching often define the legacy we leave behind. He spoke about how true success is measured not in wealth or fame, but in the number of lives we quietly lift, the doors we open for others without expectation of return. His voice, calm yet brimming with emotion, reached into hearts across the world as he said, "Never underestimate the moment you are in right now. Never believe that your integrity, your kindness, your perseverance go unnoticed. Every decision you make, every time you choose to do the right thing even when it's hard, plants a seed. You may not see it grow immediately, but someday somewhere, someone's life will be better because of it. That is your real legacy." As the conference hall rose in a thunderous standing ovation, as millions at home wiped tears from their eyes, Ethan felt no pride, no self-congratulation. What he felt was something purer: gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the people who believed in him when he didn't yet believe in himself, for every small moment that had whispered to him, "Keep going." Later that evening, as the city lights shimmered in the distance, Ethan found a quiet place beneath an old oak tree outside the conference center. The sky stretched above him, vast and infinite, the stars winking like ancient witnesses to his story. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about Sundar Pichai, the man who had seen something valuable in a young guard and had chosen to nurture it instead of dismiss it. He thought about his parents, about Isabella and the other mentees, about the students now mentoring others in turn, about the countless ripples of goodness spreading outward into a world desperately in need of it. He realized, with profound clarity, that while the chapter he was living was beautiful, it was not an ending. It could never be, for every life touched sparked another, and another, and another, in an endless chain of unseen miracles. The journey of kindness, of leadership, of purpose, these were journeys that had no finish line, only new beginnings woven into the fabric of time. Opening his eyes to the glittering night sky, Ethan smiled, his heart full. He stood up, brushed off his jeans, and walked forward, not toward an ending, but toward a horizon rich with endless possibilities, carrying with him the timeless truth that had guided him from the very beginning. The understanding that in a world obsessed with grand moments, it is the small ones, embraced with heart and integrity, that truly change the world. And somewhere, perhaps far away yet forever close, a simple side door waited, quietly reminding all who passed through it that sometimes the door we guard today holds the key to the future we cannot yet imagine. At the inaugural event, Ethan took the stage to deliver the keynote speech. Standing before an audience that mirrored his former self, ordinary people whose daily efforts often went unrecognized, he spoke not as a distant success story, but as a fellow traveler who understood their struggles, their hopes, their silent contributions. His voice, steady yet emotional, carried a message rooted deeply in lived experience. Sometimes, Ethan said, the moment that changes your life forever won't come with fanfare or flashing lights. It will come disguised as a duty you think is small. It will come wrapped in an uncomfortable choice, and when it comes, you won't feel ready. But if you meet that moment with honesty, integrity, and heart, you'll find that it was never small at all. It was the seed of everything you are meant to become. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, not just out of admiration, but out of deep resonance. In that room, people felt seen, not for their titles or resumes, but for their unseen contributions and the quiet nobility of their everyday work. Ethan watched the faces before him, faces marked by struggles, sacrifices, and unspoken dreams. And he realized that this was his true purpose: to make sure no one believed their efforts were invisible, to remind the world that greatness grows from humility, service, and perseverance. As the summit concluded, Sundar approached Ethan, pride glowing quietly in his eyes. They exchanged few words. None were needed. A simple handshake, a nod, a smile. They carried the weight of a shared understanding that leadership at its best is not about standing above others, but walking alongside them, lifting them when needed, and never losing sight of the small moments where real transformation begins. That night, as Ethan sat alone on his balcony overlooking the sprawling lights of the city, he found himself overwhelmed not with ambition but with gratitude. He thought about the boy he had been, the boy who had once stood guard at a door, unknowingly standing at the threshold of his own destiny. He thought about the man he was becoming, a man who understood that every action, no matter how small, carries within it the power to change the world, if only we have the courage to act with heart. He looked up at the stars, scattered like promises across the velvet sky, and whispered a quiet vow to himself: to keep building bridges, to keep believing in the power of small moments, and to never forget that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a single ordinary choice. The journey never ends. Years unfolded like pages from a book Ethan never wanted to close. From the moment he had unknowingly guarded the future at the side door of the Zenith Convention Center, to the moment he stood as a mentor, a builder of bridges, and a symbol of hope for countless others, every step had been both a blessing and a responsibility. Yet even as accolades accumulated and new opportunities appeared like stars across his horizon, Ethan remained grounded in a profound truth. The real journey was not marked by milestones of success, but by the ever-deepening commitment to grow, to serve, and to uplift. It was never about reaching a final destination. It was about embracing the infinite nature of purpose, about understanding that the truest legacies are those woven invisibly into the lives of others. The Small Moments Summit became an annual tradition, each year larger and more impactful than the last. It drew leaders from around the world, not just CEOs and public figures, but teachers, nurses, bus drivers, first responders, cafeteria workers, ordinary heroes whose quiet integrity shaped the world behind the scenes. Ethan found joy not in the grandeur of the events, but in the handwritten notes he received from attendees, notes filled with stories of resilience and renewed hope. They spoke of how a simple recognition of their unseen efforts had rekindled their spirits, had reminded them that their lives mattered far beyond the scope of their job descriptions. Ethan read every letter, sometimes late into the night, humbled and deeply moved, always remembering that he, too, had once needed someone to see his worth before he could fully see it himself. At Google, Ethan's role evolved from intern to engineer, from engineer to team leader, and eventually to Director of Community Initiatives, a role created specifically to recognize and elevate the type of transformational work he had pioneered. Despite his growing title, he never cloistered himself behind office walls. He made it a practice to spend time every week walking the Google campuses, speaking to janitors, security staff, cafeteria workers, interns, listening, learning, connecting. He remembered how it felt to be unseen, and he vowed never to let that happen on his watch. His leadership style became a quiet revolution in itself, inspiring others across departments and industries to lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. It was on one of those reflective visits that Sundar joined him, their meeting unplanned yet perfectly timed. The two men stood side by side, looking at the unremarkable door that had set extraordinary events into motion. Sundar, ever the thoughtful leader, broke the silence. "You built something beautiful, Ethan," he said, his voice filled with pride, but also a quiet sadness, the sadness of knowing how rare such journeys were. Ethan turned toward him, gratitude welling in his chest. "I just followed the example you set," he replied. "You showed me what leadership really looks like." Sundar chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, Ethan. I only opened a door. You chose to walk through it. And now you're the one holding it open for others. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the pavement, the two men stood for a moment longer, not as CEO and employee, not as mentor and mentee, but as fellow travelers, linked by an invisible bridge they had both helped build. One built not with steel and concrete, but with trust, integrity, resilience, and hope. Ethan knew that his journey was still unfolding. There would be new challenges, new dreams, new bridges to build. But whatever the future held, he would face it the same way he had faced every step of his remarkable journey, with an open heart, a determined spirit, and an unshakable belief that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple, quiet choice to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. The legacy of small moments. Time, as it often does, moved with silent persistence, weaving the threads of Ethan Carter's life into a broader tapestry than he had ever imagined. The Bridge program continued to flourish, becoming not just a department within Google, but a living movement across industries, a symbol of how genuine care and commitment could change lives when combined with opportunity. But even as his professional life soared, Ethan found himself reflecting more often not on the grand moments or the applause, but on the smaller, quieter ones, the hesitant smile of a mentee after a tough conversation, the late-night emails filled with self-doubt that he answered patiently, the handshakes with parents who never thought their children would attend college. It was in these small, almost invisible exchanges that Ethan saw the true measure of his journey, and it deepened his understanding that greatness is often built, not in the flashes of recognition, but in the quiet persistence of small acts of kindness, consistency, and belief. The realization struck him even more powerfully during an unexpected visit to his old neighborhood one chilly autumn evening. Driven by a sudden wave of nostalgia, Ethan decided to walk the familiar streets where he had once lived, streets lined with cracked sidewalks, modest homes, and the faint echoes of children playing basketball in the fading light. Everything seemed smaller now, but not in a way that belittled it. Rather, it reminded him of how vast his dreams had once seemed against this humble backdrop, and how hard he had fought to believe they could be real. As he passed the small corner grocery store he used to frequent, he noticed an old neighbor, Mr. Ramirez, sitting outside, bundled in a thick jacket against the cool wind. They exchanged greetings, and in the simple warmth of that moment, Ethan was reminded that success had meaning only when it remained connected to the roots from which it grew. During that walk, Ethan's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. It was the anniversary of the Zenith Convention Center event, the day he had once thought was a mere mistake, but which had instead become the pivotal turning point of his life. A surge of emotion washed over him as he realized how a single small moment, a forgotten badge, a firm but polite no, and a simple conversation, had spiraled outward like ripples on a pond, touching not just his life, but the lives of hundreds, soon to be thousands. It humbled him, and it filled him with an even greater sense of responsibility. Determined to honor the spirit of that day, Ethan proposed to Sundar a new annual tradition, the Small Moments Summit, a gathering not to celebrate massive achievements or lofty titles, but to recognize the power of everyday acts of courage, integrity, and kindness that often went unnoticed. The idea resonated deeply with Sundar, who had always believed that the future belonged not to those who shouted the loudest, but to those who quietly built, helped, listened, and persevered. With Google's support, the summit launched the following year, bringing together security guards, janitors, junior engineers, cafeteria workers, customer service representatives, people who formed the invisible backbone of every organization, but who rarely stood in the spotlight. The bridge between two worlds. Success, Ethan learned, was not a destination. It was a bridge, one that connected dreams to reality, effort to opportunity, and individuals to communities. As he stood firmly upon this bridge, he became acutely aware of the vast distance he had traveled, but also of the many others still waiting for their chance to cross. While his days were now filled with challenging projects, brainstorming sessions with brilliant minds, and experiences that constantly expanded his horizons. He never allowed himself to forget the life he had left behind, the life that still thrived just a few streets away from the gleaming towers of Silicon Valley. That life was filled with hard-working families, juggling multiple jobs, students drowning under the weight of tuition and responsibilities, and young dreamers who could not yet see a path forward. Ethan knew that real success was not climbing higher and higher alone. It was reaching back, building new bridges, and lighting the way for others. Driven by this sense of responsibility, Ethan proposed a new initiative during his internship, one that would later grow into one of the most celebrated mentorship and scholarship programs within Google. His idea was simple but powerful: create a structured platform where employees could mentor underprivileged students interested in technology, providing not just financial aid but real, consistent human support, mentorship, workshops, internships, and a clear roadmap into tech careers. Many senior executives were intrigued but cautious. Ideas like these often sounded good in theory, but faltered in practice. Yet Ethan's quiet persistence, combined with his compelling story, convinced them to give him a trial pilot. The program was named Bridge, a tribute to the idea that talent and ambition existed everywhere, but opportunity did not. Sundar himself endorsed the initiative, highlighting it in his talks as an example of how companies could empower communities meaningfully, not just symbolically. Bridge launched with just 20 students from nearby underserved high schools, each paired with a mentor from Google. Ethan personally mentored 3 students, pouring into them the same patience, wisdom, and encouragement that Sundar had once gifted him. The first few months were tough. Many students came with deep skepticism, hardened by years of being overlooked, underestimated, or pitied. Trust was not given freely. It had to be earned. Ethan spent countless hours beyond his regular workload meeting with his mentees, helping them with schoolwork, teaching them coding basics, but more importantly, listening to their fears, their frustrations, their silent hopes. Slowly, walls crumbled. Confidence took root. Dreams, once buried under layers of survival instinct, began to surface. Ethan saw pieces of his younger self reflected in each of them: the doubts, the longing, the fierce yet fragile hope. One student in particular, a shy, sharp-minded girl named Isabella, captured Ethan's attention. She rarely spoke in group sessions, her words wrapped in caution, but her coding assignments showed a creative brilliance that shone brightly through her hesitation. Over months of mentorship, Ethan helped her see what he had once struggled to see in himself. That genius is not loud or boastful. It can be quiet, persistent, and quietly revolutionary. Isabella would later go on to win a national coding competition, an achievement she once would have thought impossible. Bridge grew beyond expectations. It caught media attention through corporate sponsorships and inspired similar initiatives across other tech companies. But for Ethan, the true reward was not in the headlines or accolades. It was in the letters he received from students, letters filled with stories of first college admissions, first tech internships, first dreams dared and pursued. It was in the faces of young men and women who now stood taller, who saw not closed doors but open pathways. Despite his growing influence and the increasing demands on his time, Ethan remained grounded, anchored by the memory of his own unlikely journey. He would often visit the Zenith Convention Center on quiet weekends, standing near the side entrance where his story had begun. The guard stationed there now, a young man named Jordan, once stopped him politely, asking for his badge. Ethan had smiled then, feeling a profound sense of symmetry, of life coming full circle. He had shown Jordan his badge and offered a quiet word of encouragement, understanding deeply the sacred responsibility that came with standing watch at a door, not just guarding who came in, but sometimes, unknowingly, guarding the very beginnings of someone's future. Taking a deep breath, Ethan decided to change his approach. He called a special meeting, not to assign tasks, but to listen, to truly listen. He asked each member what they felt passionate about, what strengths they brought, what fears they carried about the project. Slowly, walls began to crumble. Resentments softened. Trust, fragile and tentative, began to form. From there, Ethan restructured the project around people's passions and strengths rather than imposing rigid roles. He set clear goals, celebrated small victories, and addressed conflicts with fairness and respect. When the project was finally presented, it wasn't just successful. It was celebrated by the faculty as an example of outstanding collaboration and innovation. Ethan realized that true leadership was less about steering the ship alone and more about inspiring others to row together toward a common horizon. Beyond the classroom, Sundar continued to mentor Ethan, though now their conversations shifted from academic advice to deeper reflections on life, responsibility, and vision. Sundar shared stories of his early days at Google, days when he wasn't a CEO, but a young engineer struggling to get his ideas noticed. He spoke of the battles fought not with arrogance but with patience, of victories earned not by crushing competition, but by uplifting teams and nurturing ideas. Through these stories, Sundar planted seeds of wisdom in Ethan's mind, seeds that would grow into the foundation of his leadership philosophy. As months turned into years, Ethan's confidence blossomed. He won a competitive internship at Google, working alongside brilliant minds on projects that touched millions of lives. He remembered his first day vividly. Walking into the sprawling Googleplex, he felt the same nerves he had once felt approaching a classroom. But this time, he carried with him a quiet certainty born of experience, mentorship, and relentless perseverance. His badge, once a symbol of guarding doors, now unlocked doors of innovation, creativity, and collaboration. Yet, amid his growing success, Ethan never forgot where he had come from. He made it a point to mentor younger students, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, those who, like him, once stood on the margins of opportunity, gazing longingly at doors that seemed forever closed. He shared his story not as a tale of sudden triumph, but as a testament to the power of small, courageous decisions, the decision to stand firm, to persevere, to say yes to growth even when fear screamed no. One particularly memorable afternoon, as part of a leadership summit hosted by Google, Ethan was asked to give a talk about his journey. Standing on the stage, facing hundreds of eager faces, he felt a swell of emotion. He spoke not about achievements or accolades, but about the moment at the side entrance of the Zenith Convention Center, the moment that had changed everything. He spoke about how leadership was sometimes forged not in grand gestures, but in simple acts of integrity, how opportunity often dressed itself as hardship, how believing in oneself, even when surrounded by doubt, was the greatest act of courage one could perform. As he finished, the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. Among the crowd, standing quietly in the back with a small, proud smile, was Sundar Pichai. Their eyes met briefly, and in that silent exchange was a world of understanding, a recognition of a journey shared, a seed planted, a life transformed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the campus in hues of gold and purple, Ethan sat alone on a quiet bench. He looked up at the sky, vast and endless, and thought about the incredible series of events that had brought him here. A forgotten badge, a firm but polite refusal, an unexpected opportunity, and the steady, guiding presence of a mentor who believed not in what he was, but in what he could become. He realized then that life's greatest doors were rarely opened by force. They were unlocked by integrity, patience, humility, and resilience. And sometimes, when you least expect it, the very act of standing guard at a door can become the key to stepping into your own destiny. Ethan Carter, once the unknown security guard, was now not just stepping through doors, but building them for others to walk through. And he understood deeply that every act of kindness, every choice of integrity, every quiet stand for what is right, these were not just moments. They were seeds. Seeds that, when nurtured with courage and hope, could grow into forests of change. By the time the call ended, Ethan felt a fire rekindling inside him, a quiet but fierce determination. He realized that the badge he had once worn as a security guard had not just been a symbol of authority. It had been a symbol of responsibility, integrity, and perseverance. These were the same qualities he needed now. Not a perfect GPA, not instant mastery, but the stubborn courage to keep showing up even when the path ahead blurred with uncertainty. Over the following months, Ethan transformed not through sudden brilliance, but through relentless dedication. He asked questions even when he was embarrassed. He sought help without shame, and he treated each setback not as a verdict, but as a lesson. Slowly, the fog began to lift. Concepts that once seemed alien started to make sense. Coding languages that looked like secret codes began to feel like familiar tools. Small victories built upon each other like bricks, forming a foundation that grew stronger each day. Meanwhile, Sundar continued to check in, sometimes through a short email, sometimes through a quick call. Each interaction a reminder that leadership was not about towering above others, but lifting them up. Through Sundar's mentorship, Ethan learned lessons that no textbook could teach, that humility is strength, that patience is power, and that true success is measured not just in achievements, but in how many others you empower along the way. By the time Ethan's first year ended, he was no longer the uncertain guard who had nervously stopped a stranger at a door. He was becoming a creator, a thinker, a leader in his own right. And while he still carried the memory of that day, the day he said no to Sundar Pichai, it no longer haunted him with doubt. Instead, it stood as a beacon, a reminder that sometimes the smallest stands we take can open the largest doors, not just for others, but for ourselves. In the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by books and a growing sense of possibility, Ethan framed his old security badge and placed it above his desk. It was no longer just a piece of plastic. It was a symbol of the moment his life changed forever. Not because he sought greatness, but because he stood firm for what was right. And somewhere across the city, in a corner office bathed in the soft glow of evening light, Sundar Pichai smiled as he read one of Ethan's latest project proposals, a clear sign that the seed he had seen in a young guard's courage was beginning to blossom into something extraordinary. The seed of leadership. Seasons shifted quietly in San Francisco, and with them, so too did the chapters of Ethan's life. The gray skies of winter softened into the blossoming hues of spring, and as the city awakened in vibrant color, Ethan found himself evolving as well, emerging from the cocoon of uncertainty into a new, more confident version of himself. College, once an intimidating fortress, had become a landscape he navigated with increasing surety. Projects that had once seemed insurmountable were now opportunities he embraced. His nights, still filled with long hours of study, no longer felt like struggles, but instead like purposeful investments into a dream he could finally see shaping before him. Yet, what truly set this period apart was not just the academic success, but the deeper transformation within. The slow but certain blossoming of a leader. Ethan's first real test came not from an exam or a project deadline, but from a group assignment that quickly spiraled into conflict. He had been assigned to lead a diverse team of students, each with their own ideas, backgrounds, and ambitions. At first, he tried to be accommodating, believing that leadership meant pleasing everyone. But the project faltered, meetings turned chaotic, deadlines loomed, and morale plummeted. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, an invisible burden growing heavier with each passing day. One night, as he sat at the campus library, head in his hands, he recalled Sundar's words from one of their early conversations. Leadership isn't about commanding attention or forcing compliance. It's about bringing clarity where there is confusion, purpose where there is division. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Ethan blinked, sure he had misheard. "You mean, like a job?" he stammered. "Not yet." Sundar smiled. "First, the tools. Then, the journey. We believe in building the future, not just hiring it." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, unbidden. He swallowed hard, feeling a storm of gratitude, disbelief, and joy rise inside him. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. Outside the cafe, the sun bathed the streets in gold, and a soft breeze stirred the leaves. Inside, a single handshake sealed not just a scholarship, not just a mentorship, but the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in bold headlines, but in quiet acts of respect, belief, and hope. As they stood to leave, Sundar placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and said, "Never forget this, Ethan. Sometimes the biggest doors are opened by the courage to say no at the right time." And in that moment, Ethan understood. He hadn't just guarded a building yesterday. He had guarded something far greater. And the world had taken notice. The lessons behind the badge. The weeks that followed Ethan's meeting with Sundar Pichai unfolded like a dream gently stitched into reality. Each morning he woke up half expecting it all to vanish like mist. This chance at a future he had long tucked away into the impossible corners of his mind. Yet it was real. The acceptance letter arrived on official letterhead, the scholarship funds were transferred, and a mentorship track was outlined, complete with bi-weekly virtual sessions with some of Google's brightest engineers and thinkers. Ethan's life, once defined by routines of checking IDs and standing watch, had taken on a new rhythm, pulsing with the excitement of possibility. But the transformation was not without its struggles. The first classes at the university were overwhelming. Many of his classmates were younger, tech-savvy, and seemed to speak an entirely different language of coding languages, algorithms, and mathematical theories. Ethan, who had spent the past few years working full-time, felt like a man trying to board a moving train. Doubt began to creep in at night when he sat before a blinking cursor on his laptop, struggling with assignments that felt as if they were written in a foreign tongue. There were moments when exhaustion gnawed at his resolve, moments when he almost believed the quiet whisper of failure growing louder in his mind. It was during one of those nights, around 3 a.m, when Ethan found himself staring out of his small window into the empty streets beyond. His textbooks lay open on the table, notes scattered like fallen leaves. His heart felt heavy with the weight of inadequacy. He questioned not just his ability to succeed, but whether he even deserved the chance he had been given. It was then that his phone buzzed, a simple notification for a scheduled mentorship call. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to hide away in the safety of his failure. Yet, out of a sense of respect and duty, he answered. On the other end was not one of the junior engineers but Sundar himself, joining unexpectedly. His voice, calm and steady, filled the small apartment with a warmth that Ethan hadn't realized he so desperately needed. "I thought I'd check in personally," Sundar said, a hint of humor in his tone. "Education is tough. It's supposed to stretch you, even scare you a little. How are you feeling, Ethan?" For a moment, Ethan wrestled with the urge to say he was fine, to put on the brave mask he wore every day. But something about Sundar's question, about his genuine care, stripped away the pretense. In halting words, Ethan admitted his struggles, his doubts, and his growing fear that he might let everyone down. There was a long pause. Then Sundar spoke, choosing his words carefully, like a craftsman selecting the right tool. "You know, when I first came to America for my studies, I felt exactly the same way," he began. "I had never even used a computer before college. Everything was new, the food, the culture, the way classes were taught. I struggled a lot, but I learned something important. The feeling of being lost is not a signal to turn back. It's a sign you're about to discover something new inside yourself." Ethan listened, every word sinking deep into the soil of his doubt like rain. Sundar continued, recounting nights spent poring over books he barely understood, jobs he worked just to afford rent, and the loneliness that gnawed at him when he wondered if he had made a mistake chasing such a distant dream. Yet through it all, he persevered, not because he was the smartest in the room, but because he refused to let temporary feelings define permanent realities. "Intelligence is valuable," Sundar said, his voice firm yet kind, "but resilience is priceless. If you keep moving forward, no matter how slow, you will outrun every obstacle eventually." For Ethan Carter, this was more than just a day of guarding doors. It was the day he learned what true leadership looked like, not just commanding power, but uplifting people. The call that changed everything. The echoes of Sundar's speech lingered in the Great Hall long after the thunderous applause faded. People left the keynote buzzing with excitement, but more than the announcements, it was his story about the young security guard that captured hearts. Twitter feeds exploded with praises about Sundar's humility. LinkedIn was filled with posts highlighting lessons in leadership and integrity. Yet outside the grandeur of the event, Ethan Carter remained unaware of the role he had unwittingly played in what was already being termed the most human moment in tech history. He simply finished his shift, clocked out, and quietly walked home through the sprawling streets of San Francisco, his mind heavy with thoughts about what had happened. Ethan lived in a modest studio apartment just a few blocks away, walls decorated with a handful of family photos and a corkboard littered with sticky notes bearing motivational quotes. Security work, though honest and dependable, was never meant to be his final destination. He had bigger dreams, of studying computer science, of maybe one day working for a tech company like Google. But those dreams seemed distant, locked behind barriers of tuition fees, responsibilities, and the quiet weight of self-doubt that clung to him, no matter how much he tried to shake it off. As he sat on his worn-out couch that evening, mindlessly flipping through TV channels, his phone buzzed sharply on the table. The number was unfamiliar. He hesitated. Spam call, maybe. But some small, insistent voice inside him, nudged him to answer. "Hello," he said cautiously. "Ethan Carter," came a warm, professional voice. "This is Rebecca Lynn, Chief of Staff at Google. Mr. Sundar Pichai would like to personally invite you to a private luncheon tomorrow, if you're available." For a moment, Ethan thought it was a prank. He almost laughed. But the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and when she emailed official details a few minutes later, complete with Google's letterhead, reality hit him like a sudden gust of wind. He stared at the email in disbelief, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. What could Sundar possibly want with him? Had he done something wrong after all? Was it a formality, some polite way to address an embarrassment? Or maybe was it something more? Anxiety and excitement wrestled inside him as he reread the email over and over until the words blurred. Sleep that night came in short, restless bursts, every dream flickering between fear and hope. The next morning, dressed in his best, and only, formal shirt and a carefully ironed pair of pants, Ethan arrived at the address Rebecca had provided. It wasn't a corporate office or a boardroom as he had expected. It was a cozy, sunlit cafe tucked in a quiet corner of Palo Alto, a place that smelled of fresh bread, coffee, and wildflowers. There, at a corner table by the window, sat Sundar Pichai himself, sipping tea from a simple white cup, dressed casually yet radiating a presence that made the ordinary setting feel extraordinary. When Sundar saw Ethan, he stood up and smiled warmly, extending his hand as if greeting an old friend. "Ethan," he said, with genuine warmth, "I'm so glad you came." Ethan shook his hand, his own palms clammy with nervousness. He struggled to find words but managed a shaky, "Thank you for inviting me, sir." "Please," Sundar said, motioning for him to sit. "No need for sir. We're just two people having a conversation." Over fresh croissants and hot coffee, Sundar asked Ethan about his life, his background, his dreams, his challenges. Ethan found himself opening up more easily than he expected, talking about his family, his struggles to pay for college, his secret hope of working in technology someday. Throughout it all, Sundar listened intently, not with the distracted politeness of a busy executive, but with the focused compassion of someone who truly cared. Finally, after a pause, Sundar leaned forward and said, "You showed me something yesterday that many people forget when they reach a certain level, the importance of principles. You didn't let status, assumptions, or appearances shake your duty. That's rare, and that's valuable." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had spent so much of his life feeling invisible, ordinary, replaceable. Yet here was one of the most powerful men in the world, not just acknowledging him, but seeing something valuable in him. Then Sundar pulled a slim folder from his bag and slid it across the table. Google runs a scholarship and mentorship program for people like you, people with integrity, ambition, and heart. We'd like to sponsor your education and bring you into our mentorship track, if you're willing. The man outside the door. It was one of the brightest days in San Francisco, the city buzzing with excitement. The towering glass building of the Zenith Convention Center shimmered like a giant crystal under the morning sun. Inside, a major tech event was about to unfold, a showcase of Google's latest innovations. Cameras, journalists, influencers, students, developers, all gathered for what was being called the future unveiled. At the heart of this event was one man, Sundar Pichai. The world knew him as the soft-spoken, brilliant CEO of Google and Alphabet, a man who had risen from humble beginnings in Chennai, India, to become one of the most powerful and respected leaders in the tech world. But today, fate had an unexpected twist planned for him. Sundar preferred simplicity. No fancy cavalcades, no red carpets. He loved walking among people, feeling the pulse of the world he helped create. That morning, dressed in a modest navy blue jacket and jeans, he decided to enter through the side entrance. No fanfare, no security entourage, just like the old days when he was just another engineer. As he approached the side door, a young security guard, perhaps in his early 20s, stood firmly at his post. His name was Ethan Carter, fresh to the job, nervous but eager to prove himself. Ethan's instructions were crystal clear. No badge, no entry, no exceptions. A directive he'd been drilled on all week by his superiors. Sundar, smiling warmly, approached the young man. "Good morning," Sundar said, his voice calm, almost melodic. Ethan nodded, shifting his stance slightly. "Badge, please, sir." Sundar reached into his jacket and then realized he had forgotten his event badge at home. "Ah," he chuckled softly, "it seems I've left my badge behind. I'm Sundar Pichai. I'm the keynote speaker for today." For a moment, Ethan hesitated. The name sounded very familiar, but his training kicked in. No badge, no entry. Names could be faked. Appearances could be deceiving. "I'm really sorry, sir," Ethan said, standing firm. "Without a badge, I can't let you in. Maybe you can go around to the main desk for verification." Sundar, instead of bristling with anger or pulling rank, simply nodded. "Of course, you're just doing your job." He took a step back, smiled again, and started walking around the vast building toward the main entrance. His assistant had rushed ahead earlier, caught up in final prep work. Sundar was very much on his own. But what happened next would change more than just the event. As Sundar walked toward the front, a few things happened simultaneously. A group of journalists recognized him and started snapping photos. A live stream camera caught him being denied entry, though without the full context. Social media began to buzz. Did Sundar just get locked out of his own event? Within minutes, the video clip was trending. Meanwhile, Ethan stood at his post, unaware of the brewing storm. He felt a small pang of guilt but reassured himself. He had followed the rules. That's what mattered, right? Inside the convention center, executives were scrambling. Sundar's keynote was in less than 45 minutes, and he wasn't in the VIP lounge yet. Panic seeped through the team like spilled ink. Where's Sundar? Is he stuck in traffic? Did we check the side entrances? Calls were made. Messages flew. And as Sundar casually approached the main lobby, he was finally recognized by the official security chief, who rushed over, eyes wide with horror. "Mr. Pichai, my deepest apologies. Please, this way." Sundar simply smiled, shook the man's hand, and said, "No problem at all. Your young guard out there is doing an excellent job, protecting everyone." The chief blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The keynote began, and Sundar stood tall before the massive audience. But before diving into product announcements, he decided to share the morning's experience. "I was stopped at the door today," he began, smiling warmly. The audience chuckled nervously. "But I want you to think about what that really means. It means someone stood by their responsibility. Someone valued integrity over appearances. And isn't that exactly the kind of courage we need today? In technology, in society, in life." The crowd erupted into applause. In that single moment, Sundar turned an awkward hiccup into a profound lesson about leadership, humility, and respect. Meanwhile, outside in the hallway, Ethan stood with another guard, watching a live feed on a small screen. When Sundar mentioned being stopped, Ethan's face paled. "That was me," he whispered. But then he heard Sundar's praise about integrity, about doing the right thing. And a wave of emotion swept over him. Pride, relief, gratitude.